Okay, so here is our lesson describing using Soh Cah Toa to find the length of a side of a right triangle. So we call these triangles right triangles because they have a right angle. Soh Cah Toa is a mnemonic device that helps us remember that the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. I'm going to abbreviate. That the cosine is the adjacent means next to over hypotenuse, and that the tangent is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Get with it, Torville. Tangent is the opposite over adjacent. So let's apply that to these examples. All right. And before we talk about that, I want to show you Desmos. So if you're using Desmos for sine, cosine, tangent, and whatnot, first go to the little wrench and make sure it is in degree mode, not radian mode. We will talk about radians a lot in this class, but you want your calculator in degree mode or your answer will be wrong 99.9% of the time. After you have it in degree mode, you can go to functions, and this is where the trigonometric functions show up. So we'll be using sine, cosine, tangent mostly. In the next video, when you're finding the inverse sine, cosine, or tangent, those are these: arc sine, arc cos, arc tangent. And for one of these examples, I think we are going to, so that didn't show it. Oh well, we'll just solve it. So, I know this 40-degree angle. What that means is that this side is the hypotenuse. And again, if we're talking about this 40-degree angle, the adjacent, the side next to it, would be this. So if you're confused, you might want to just first label the sides of the triangle. And again, that depends on what angle you're talking about. If we were talking about this angle, what is adjacent and opposite would be different. But what we can say for the 40-degree angle is something like, let's see, adjacent over hypotenuse, A over H, Ka, so that's cosine. So we could say cosine of 40 degrees equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And our calculator will tell us what the cosine of 40 degrees is. Hold that thought. So use Desmos. I'm just using a normal calculator so I don't mess up the video. But cosine of 40 degrees, calculator says is 0.766. And at this point, so if you're mid-calculation, you want at least 3 decimal places. If you were to round this to 0.8, you're going to get an answer that's really wrong. So at least 3 decimal places. We're solving for the variable. So I think, you see, we should just multiply both sides by 10. And that would give us x equals 7.66. If we look, does that make sense? So the cool thing about these is sometimes you'll get these lengths of sides that it says 10,000 and it's obviously wrong. But if this is 10, 7.6, 7.7, sure, looks reasonable. To solve for y, if we're using the 40-degree angle, well, we can say, let's see, we could use opposite over adjacent, so we could use tangent, now that we know this side, or we could do opposite over hypotenuse, and that would be the sine of 40 degrees. So, if we say sine of 40 degrees equals, and this would be opposite over hypotenuse, so that is y over 10, and sine 40 degrees, calculator says 0.642787. So again, at least 3 decimal places within the calculation. Multiply both sides by 10, and we're ending up with y equals 6.4. Okay, so does that look reasonable? Sure. Questions? Oh, well, you're just staring at the computer, so never mind. Alright, so that sounds good. Example 2 ends up being a little different because our variables end up in the denominator. So, if we are solving for x, All right, here's our angle. So we have our adjacent side, the one next to it. This is the hypotenuse, and this is the opposite side. So we could say that the cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, cosine of 25 degrees, so cosine 25 degrees is adjacent over hypotenuse, and calculator says cosine of 25 degrees is 0.906. So the common mistake right here is that people just divide both sides by 8 and think that's the answer. You'd get a really small number, and it'd hopefully be obvious that that's not the length of the side. Variables in the denominator, so I recommend putting that over 1 and cross multiplying. So this would give us 0.906x equals 1 times 8. And so you see how we're actually going to be dividing by that. So this should give us a more reasonable answer. 8 divided by 0.906. Uh-oh. So it looks like x, and I'm getting 8.83. So that looks reasonable, right? It should be more than this side, which it is. And then to solve for y, we could say a couple things. One is, we could say that the sine of 25 degrees is opposite over hypotenuse, now that we know what the hypotenuse is. Or we could say tangent of 25 degrees equals opposite over adjacent. So within rounding differences, right, because this is a rounded answer right here, these are going to give us the exact same thing. Let's see. Tangent 25 equals y over 8. So I'm going to just plug tangent 25 into the calculator, multiply by 8. So, excuse me, 8 times tangent 25, we get that y equals 3.73. So that looks pretty reasonable as well. 3.7 or 3.73 over here. So you could try that. Both of these should give you the same thing. So if you know multiple sides, you definitely have some choice as to how you can calculate the length of a side. Thanks for watching.